VRTK is a library that can be used to create virtual reality games and experiences in Unity. This library includes a lot of components that can be dropped into any project, and they work right out of the box for many different platforms. It also has a very easy to use system to switch between different SDKs. This is an open source project, which means that the source code is available, in this case on YouTube, and the license of this library allows you to use it in all kinds of projects, which is fantastic. This library is being used in a lot of production games on Steam. Now, things to keep in mind regarding VRTK. One of them is that, in my personal opinion, if you are serious into becoming a VR developer, you need to understand how a lot of things were built before you should be using a library that is just based on building blocks, unless you want to go and really read through the source code of the library itself. Now, why am I saying that? Because there might be situations where you need something different than what is provided by the library. And in those situations, if you don't have a strong foundation of how VR works and how Unity works, you might be stuck and you might not be able to resolve those things. Whereas if you start from the ground up and you understand all the core elements, then it will be easy for you to access this library, modify it if you need to, or easily upgrade between versions as well. So that is just my opinion on the topic. And I know that a lot of people have published amazing games just by dragging and dropping elements with this library. There are many different versions, so I'm going to be using the latest version in this course. And if you want to use a different version, like an older version, for example, on the GitHub page, just go to this button here, which will say something like, normally will say something like branches, and then you can go to tags and pick whichever version you want to use, and then you can go to here which says click or download, and you can download the zip, unzip that, and then you can import that into your assets folder, and you'll be good to go. You can also download the library from the asset store, which I'll be doing in a second. Now, what else is important here to mention? There is a YouTube channel for the library, which is fantastic. It includes a lot of tutorials, and also it includes upgrade instructions. Because the other thing I wanted to say was that since I started making courses on VR, this library has already had 2 really major upgrades. So it is in very active development, and therefore the process of upgrading is something that you will most likely encounter if you're using it. Of course, since it's open source, you can always decide which version you want to use, and you can stick with an older version or choose a version in particular, but it is highly likely that you'll have to upgrade at one point. So in the YouTube channel, normally you will find very good upgrading instructions if that is the case. All right, so let's get started and let's start looking at the library, setting up some basic things, and then we'll move on to building our game. So I'm gonna open Unity, and I've created already a new project here. I've saved my scene, and now the very next thing I want to do is bring in this library. So I'm gonna go to the asset store, and I'm going to search for VRTK. And as I said before, you can also download it from GitHub if you want, for example, the latest code for some reason. The version here in the asset store is always a little bit behind what's on GitHub. So I'm going to select here VRTK, and I'm going to click on import to bring that into my project. So when that completes, I'm going to import, which will import all the packages and prepare all the scripts. And when that completes, you will have a folder here named VRTK, which I strongly recommend you explore and go through and read through, if you can as well, the code. There is an examples folder which contains a lot of scenes that have basic arrangements of all the different things that this framework has to offer. For example, we can go and open the using a door scene, and we'll have something like that. where there is a door and a few elements. So then you can go and explore and see how this is built. You can also run that by pressing play. But what I'll do now is create a new scene for us and show you how a project is organized in VRTK, what all of these things mean, because they're usually the same in different projects. And after that, it will be very easy for you to go to these scenes here and understand what is happening on each one of them. So let's go here to scenes, and I'm not going to save any changes there. And here in my scene, I'm going to start by deleting the main camera. We're not going to be using that camera. There will be cameras created for us, so we will be using other cameras in our game. Then I'm going to create an empty object here, which by convention, you can call VRTK SDK manager. So some people also like to add the square brackets here, and I'm going to do that since I've seen a lot of people doing that, but it's really up to you. So we're going to have this VR SDK manager, and in this object here, we're going to be adding a component, which is the VR SDK manager component. So this component here will allow us to easily switch between different SDKs. At the time of this recording, there are several SDKs supported. There you can include Steam VR, you can include the Oculus Rift SDK. There is a developer preview version of Gear VR and Google Daydream support. Both of them have obviously a single controller. So everything that I'm going to be showing you, in this case, I'll be using two controllers, and I'll be concentrating more on Steam VR, but it all applies for all the other headsets. The only difference is that in some of the headsets, you will only have one control instead of two controllers. So you'll just create a single controller. So in this object here, this is where we will be able to set up which SDKs we are going to be using. And there is what you could call a default SDK or an editor-only SDK, which is called the simulator, which is when we press play and we want to just play here and have an easy way to move around the scene and to use the controllers to interact with objects. So that can come in handy, for example, if you don't have a VR headset, or if you are a team of two people and you only have one virtual reality headset, or imagine you're working on a multiplayer experience and you want to have two different instances of the game running. So you could use one to simulate the controllers and one to have actual real controllers. All right, so here in VRTK SDK Manager, I'm going to be creating objects for all these SDKs that I want to have. In this case, I'm going to call this Simulator SDK, or just Simulator. And it is here where we would add, for example, a Steam VR SDK or an Oculus SDK. Now, this simulator object and any other object you add is going to have a VR SDK setup controller. And in here, we are going to pick what sort of SDK this is going to be. This is going to be the simulator. So I'm going to pick that. So I'm not sure why it says mix, but I'm going to pick simulator again. There we go. So this is going to be the simulator. And inside here, we need to bring in a prefab from our VRTK package. So I'm going to go here and expand on prefabs and find my VR simulator camera rig. And I'm going to drag that into my simulator object. So in here we have different options for our simulator, which I'll show you in a second. And you can already see here in the screen that we've got, it says control hints, and we've got that crosshairs icon there. So now in my VRTK SDK manager, I can go here and where it says setups, you can see that the list is empty here. There are no SDKs ready. If we click auto populate, it's already found the simulator one. And now we should be good to press play. And well, there is nothing in the scene clearly, so we should add a couple of things just so that I can show you the simulator. So the simulator is a tool that can help you save time, and if you don't have an SDK, this is what you if you don't have a compatible head mount display, this is what you can do to follow along. You can use the simulator. So let's add some ground to the scene. So I'm going to create a plane, and I'm going to position it in the origin. The VR SDK manager, I'm going to position that in the origin as well. So this is your player, basically, is that object there. That is where your camera will live. And now if I go and I can bring in a material here, so I can go and create a new material. But for this sort of quick prototypes, VRTK already has some materials that we can use. So if I go to oh, it's actually here on example resources. There we go. Example resources, materials, textures. So we've got, for example, grass. So if you just want to have some grass to quickly show something, you can use that. You can also, there's also one that says where is it, like solid color. So if you want to have just like a green floor or something like that. So we're really just using that to create a quick demo here. So I'm going to add a couple of cubes so that we can get a bit of a sense of depth as we move around, some reference points. And now let's make this bigger. Let's actually click on maximize on play so that I can show you the simulator. So I'm going to go and press play. And the mouse itself can be used to look around. So I'm not clicking anything, I'm just simply moving the mouse. Then if I want to move, I can use the keys that are mentioned in here. So we've got the WASD, which is common on first-person shooter games. So I can move forward with W or backwards with S. And if I press A or D, I can move to the sides. So that's a quick way for you to look around and navigate your scene. Then where things get interesting here is if you press the Alt key on the left side, so that one there, I now can move the controllers. So this would be the right controller, and I am moving it by default on the plane XZ of my character. So this is basically parallel to the ground. So as you can see, I'm moving this parallel to the ground on that same plane. Now if I want to move up and down, I have to press the left control. So see this let's see if I can zoom this in to show you. So see that it says left control there. That allows me to change the axis. So by let's get the controller back here. Where is it? Let me just get that back. There we go. So if I press the left control, I can now move up or down. Basically, we're moving on the XY plane. So moving up on Y and X as well. So I can also move to the side that is perpendicular to my forward direction. All right, so now what if I want to move the other controller? I can just press Tab and I get the hold of the other controller. Now, those buttons that are specified in this area, they can simulate the different buttons of head-mounted display controllers, like the grip or touchpad press. You can have the trigger as well. So that can also come in handy. You can basically use the keyboard here to try, for example, teleportation of some of the other things. So this is a simulator, and it is a very interesting tool. So now that we've got these basics working, let's also set up the object for the controllers. So besides this VRTK SDK manager kind of parent object, there's another one that is commonly created. So I'm going to rename this to VRTK scripts. That's how people like to call it. You can obviously call it however you want. And inside here, what you do is you create game objects for both your left and your right controller. So this could be your left controller, and you can also have one object for the right controller. And then there is commonly another object called the play area, which will contain options that have to do with teleportation or how you deal with play area in when you have position tracking, for example, and there is a certain area in which you can move, or if you're going to implement other movement, other locomotion mechanics, like for example climbing a wall or different ways of teleporting or dashing, all of that is set up here. So for now we're just going to care about these two, and we have to give these two to our SDK manager. So if you go to SDK manager, you'll see here that it says script aliases left controller, right controller. So we need to drag both these objects to their corresponding box. So we've got left controller and we've got right controller. And whatever you add after doing that, whatever you add inside of this object will be used as a model of your controller. For example, if I go here and I create a, let's say a cube for the left, and I resize that to 0.1, and then I give this any of these solid colors, for example the red, and if I duplicate that and move that to the right controller and give it a different color like yellow, for example, if you now press play, we have our hands now are those elements that we added. So if I press Alt again to move to controller mode, I can move my right hand or I can move my left hand. So they are now being tracked. So that is the absolute basic setup. And to finish this lesson, I'm just going to add the Steam VR SDK so that we can get this to work with the Steam VR controllers. The process is similar to other SDKs and other headsets. So what I'm going to do here is go to the asset store. So I'm going to type Steam VR, and I'm going to click here. So this will work for all Steam VR compatible platforms, headsets. So I'm going to click import and import all these packages. So when that completes, I am recommended a few changes in the settings of the project, and I'm going to accept that all. And now that that is done, you will see that we now have the Steam VR folder here as well. So back into our VR SDK manager, VRTK SDK manager, I'm going to add another child object here, which I'm going to call Steam SDK or Steam VR SDK. And I'm going to give this SDK the same SDK setup component that I gave the simulator, but this time in quick select here, I'm going to select Steam VR. And now I'm going to go to Steam VR and expand on the prefabs folder, and there is this camera rig prefab, which already contains like the basic setup for Steam VR, which is the left, the right, and the head camera. So I'm just going to drag this into this containing object here. And now I go back to the parent object, the SDK manager. And we will see here that we're still just seeing the simulator. But if we click on auto populate, it should also find the Steam VR SDK. And we can sort them here to see which one we want to have by default when we press play here. So that's going to be the Steam VR in this case. So now I'm gonna go and press play. And now that that's completed, I have my my head mounted display, so that is working fine, and I have the controller here. And see how we are seeing both the actual controller model and this and the object that I put in. So let me show you how you can disable that so that you only see the object that you put in if you don't want to use the controller, of course. If you want to disable the Steam VR controllers and you just want to have a custom object here like a cube or I don't know, a gun or something, all you have to do is simply here in the Steam VR SDK, just expand that and expand the camera rig, and then you'll find controller left and controller right that are the tracked objects, and then the model, what you are seeing is this model object that's inside of them, these two model objects. And what they have is a script here that is what renders this controller, and as you can see, if you press the trigger, you will see the trigger being pressed and all of that. So you can just simply disable that component on both of them, and then that will give you the object that you picked. Now that is just if you want to have like a fixed type of object, like in this case, but I actually don't want that in this particular example, so I'm going to re-enable those two objects there, and I'm going to delete both cubes because I actually do want to have the default SteamVR controllers. Something else I want to include here is another object that will make my life easier when I'm working with different SDKs. So if you go to VRTK, then prefabs, you will find this SDK setup switcher. So just drag that inside your VRTK SDK manager object. And now if you just go and press play, you will see that we now have this switch SDK setup. So we are on the SteamVR, so I'm just moving the head mounted display. And if I go here, I can now go back to the simulator. And now I'm the simulator, and now I'm using the mouse and the keys to move around. And let's say that now I want to actually change back to my head mounted display. I can do it all in that area here. So that comes in handy. It is quite helpful. So that is all for this lesson. I hope that this can get you started with VRTK. And on the next lesson, we'll be adding more things. We'll be adding the ability for us to move around, to teleport. And we'll be covering a lot of other concepts as well. So I will see you then on the next lesson.